It's a beginning of global governance. It was easier, as I said, because of the crisis. And if something has been understood by the layman during this crisis, is that globalization is no more only a topic for lectures and conferences. That's a reality. We need this. And I think everybody had clearly understood that now it's impossible to find a domestic solution to global problem. We're entering now the second phase of this attempt to build some global governance.
Maybe in layman's terms, this is one part of the government lending another part of the government money, which would not lead to long-term confidence once the American people understood the basics a little bit better.
Well, it should be added that we also have a funding cost, and as interest rates go up, we'll have a liability cost as well as an asset cost, so it may or may not be a return to the Treasury.
I just might say that it's possible for a country to have a currency without a trillion-dollar debt.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah.
So, again, this is at the level of global governance something which I trust is of utmost importance. And I would say that we owe this transformation, which again has been prepared. It was overdue that these economies that were obviously systemic at the global level would have a full ownership of this global governance. We have now shipped the baton. The baton is in the hands of a grouping of countries.
It is effectively a bankruptcy of this market fundamentalist belief, and we just have to recognize that something went very wrong, and we need to reformulate our view of how financial markets work. And unless we arrest it, you have a snowball effect. And as you know, the further it goes, the bigger it gets. Financial protectionism, trade protectionism, and a breakdown of the global economy.
This is not only about the Fed, this is about the Bank of England, this is about the Banque Centrale Européenne, European Central Bank, where you got the assets that have gone up, not through sound instruments, but through the files that banks cannot recover anymore.
You mean after Building 7 exploded on 9/11,
really,
they can't get the records anymore? How convenient.
It's the whole world system that has to be revalued, and now the system has to be reconstructed on sound basis. I agree with you on accountability, I agree with you on transparency, but this cannot be done only leaving the Wall Street and the Senate and Capitol Hill alone. We need to solve it together. The world, Europe has a role to play, the Americans have a role to play.
The Federal Reserve Bank, Bank of England, European Central Bank, they all report to Bank of International Settlements in Switzerland. And that's another black box, and that's another highly corrupt institution. And again, that thriving in the darkness of non-accountability and non-transparency.
The New York Stock Exchange, once the very center of global capitalism, is now part of a $25 billion proposed merger that would give a German company majority ownership of America's most famous financial institution. The planned merger with Frankfurt's Deutsche Börse Stock Exchange is symbolic of New York City's fading dominance on the world stage.
In this new world, such dangerous currents have swept along faster than our efforts to contain them. And that is why we cannot afford to be divided. No one nation, no matter how large or powerful, can defeat such challenges alone. None of us can deny these threats or escape responsibility in meeting them. In this new century, Americans and Europeans alike will be required to do more, not less. Partnership and cooperation among nations is not a choice. It is the only way, the one way.
The IMF and the EU Commission and the European Central Bank are not in Dublin today as friends of the Irish people. They are here to enforce the writ of the financial markets. They are here at the beck and call of the big bankers, the bondholders, the hedge fund operators, who are dictating the policies in Europe at the present time. for the simple purpose of getting back the tens of billions of bad debts that they gamble on Irish developers and Irish bankers. And we're saying that the Irish working class, working people, poor people, pensioners, unemployed, should not pay a cent towards those bad debts.
EU leaders meeting in Brussels have agreed to set up a, quote, permanent mechanism to save Eurozone economies sinking in debt. They promise to do whatever is required to safeguard the common currency.
Now, this summit is happening on the backdrop of a lot of discontent across Europe. We've just seen protests in Greece get violent against the austerity measures. We've seen a couple of months ago the French coming out into the streets protesting the rise in the retirement age by 2 years. We've also seen protests in London of students because the government has been passing plans to pass the tuition fees on to students. Now, across Europe, there's this feeling of discontent, but also a sense of unfairness. There's a feeling that the middle and lower classes are shouldering the burden of the financial crisis, which has been dragging on for a couple of years now, while the small percentage that owns much of the wealth here in Europe are not feeling the pain of the austerity measures.
You must leave. No matter what your purpose is, illegal munitions could cause risk of injury to those who remain. The police action may include actual physical removal, the use of riot control to those who remain. I hereby declare this to be an unlawful assembly.
Since the Industrial Revolution, we will see a fascinating sequence of events unfolding that seem to prove the conspiracy theory, or at least provide major arguments for it. First, the ever-increasing concentration of cash and other resources in a few private hands, such as banks and gigantic multinational corporations. Corporations whose revenues are equivalent to the GDPs of entire countries, and whose mere survival demands more and more profits year after year, no matter the social cost. Second, the creation of public multilateral control organizations that are actually nothing but the public arm of powerful private interests. These organizations include the American Federal Reserve, the World Bank, and the IMF. Third, the undeniable advance of the process known as privatization. That is, taking non-renewable natural resources, communication infrastructures, heavy industries, as well as defense, health, and banking systems out of the hands of the people and delivering them into the clutches of profit-hungry private corporations. Fourth, the phenomenon of cultural and financial globalization that in truth amounts to little more than the imposition of a dominant cultural and economic system upon those of peripheral countries. Fifth, the creation of worldwide conflicts and stereotypical enemies to manipulate public opinion and destroy any possibility of discussion or dissent, leading to the actual loss of many of the most elementary democratic rights. The US Patriot Act of 2001 is a good example of this. When panic attacks, people tend to accept more and more control. Finally, and most interesting of all,